Good morning, everyone. My name is Ferial Domingo. Today I'm talking to you in the position as the chairperson of the NPO working group, but as well as the acting executive director for NPO. I'm really excited that we're all together. It's been a little while since we shared an update as the NPO working group, but we all know there's so much on the go. And, while there's been a bunch of legislative updates mulling around us, and of course, that really makes it to the top of anyone's reading list. And so we thought we wanted to just bring a few of these things into scope today. And that's why we wanted just to convene with you and just give you some sharing on what is going on. Although regulatory policy can feel pretty dense, we know that. I mean, I'm finding it like that, of course, and I'm not a lawyer. These developments can directly shape our daily operational landscape, which is, again, as I say, why we thought we wanted to bring everybody together today. So on the next slide, you'll see the program, and I'm not going to take up too much of your time because we've got very important issues to talk to you about. On the next slide, these are the people that will be coming into the space with us today. Go back, please, Suzanne. Yes, Anne Bown. I don't think she needs any introduction, but nevertheless we will. She's a consultant and she's also a very ardent member of the NPO working group. She will be talking to us about the recent NPO working group activities and also some ongoing initiatives. Nicole Cockley, who's the founder and director of NGO Law, again, does not need any introduction. She's also going to talk to us. She's going to go into a bit of a deep dive about the general laws, anti-money laundering and combating terrorist financing, the amendment bill today. We're going to be talking about that. She's going to be breaking down why these amendments are being introduced, etc. And then she will be accompanied by a fellow lawyer in her office, Chelsea Swanepoel. Suzanne Solomons will talk to us about she's going to give a bit of context and background on the Financial Action Task Force and specifically around Recommendation 8. Okay, and then we'll close out close to around 11:45, 12-ish. There will be time for questions as we go through the different sessions, but I would like to invite you to post questions in the chat. I see some of you have already started to introduce. In terms of time, unfortunately, we won't be doing the regular thing where everybody just introduces who they are, where they're from. So it'd be lovely if you could just put all of that in the chat. And then also we're going to try and keep the cameras off as much as we can, just to be respectful of bandwidth and, quality of sound and visuals, etc. Okay, we're going to start right now. So let me hand over to Anne Bown. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Lovely to see you. Well, my role today is to give you a bit of an overview, a quick overview of the impacts and achievements of the NPO working group. And before I touch on that, I just want to be very upfront about my concerns about this bill. And my concern is whether the average NPO participating in our consultation could reasonably be expected to understand these amendments and its impact. We need to look at, is the NPO Act shifting from an enabling environment towards a more strictly monitored and controlled eco-space? And we also need to ask ourselves today, are we making a legal interpretation or are we making this a public participation argument? Because I feel that's the latter is what we need to be able to speak about. We're not all lawyers, we don't have the lingo, and to be quite honest, I see the NPO Act is becoming a bit of a jigsaw puzzle with pieces in different rooms. You know, there's the regulations, there's the General Laws Amendment Bill, and there's this and there's that. And when you read this bill, you actually need to know all those other pieces of paper. Only lawyers have that ability to be able to look all that information up. So I just wanted to share that at the beginning. So let's just look at this wonderful organization, the NPO Working Group, established in October 21 after response to changes to the NPO Act. Oops, sorry, something's jumped around my system here. Those changes were that it was compulsory registration for all. And hence this goes back to the enabling environment. Are you legally obliged to register, or can you still operate? And yeah, that's how we started, and that's what we challenged. And that's how the coalition began. It's evolved into a trusted policy partner on many levels and working constructively now with government, get different government departments, while ensuring the non-profit sector's voice is heard. We don't have lobbyists in our business. We should have them. Anyway, the advisory panel of the NPO Working Group, we're 11, and we're representing across the board human rights, social workers, whatever, you name it, they are part of the non-profit landscape. And we reckon a reach of maybe estimated 10,000. So on to the second slide. This gives you a little bit about our background. You'll be getting copies of this so you can go through it at your leisure, because I know we're really short on time today. But I also want to emphasize the enhanced regional and global engagement that this has afforded us through different associates. The Global Coalition on FATF, they engage with the FATF Secretariat twice a year, and they have done amazing work. I can't sing their praises high enough. We're also part of the Southern Africa Development Countries Hub on FATF. We're part of the International Council of Non-Profit Law and the European National Council on Non-Profit Law, and the amazing Civic Advisory Hub based in Uganda, who are doing amazing work and are bringing out a handbook on the importance of recommendation 8, and all the background and everything will be in there. There's been many updates in the regular communiques that you would have seen. So we've sustained advocacy as well for an independent and capacitated NPO directorate. Many of us are working on that, and we've made presentations at the DST Recommendation 8 Symposium last March. We also made a presentation or a submission to the Special Investigating Unit on the National Corruption and Risk Management Prevention Framework. This is specific to non-profit organizations. And our basic battle cry, it was about a 5 or 6 page document, that we want partnership, we not suspicion, we want protection, not punishment, and we want reaction and prevention. So then, and more recently, last year, we co-partnered with Tello and others on the survey, Mitigating Unintended Consequences of the FATF Recommendations. These findings have been presented widely in webinars, but also to the Treasury and also to the South African Reserve Bank. Some of our members are representatives on the DSD National Task Team for the NPO Policy Renewal and the FATF Task Team on Promotion of Education and Awareness of NPO Vulnerability to Money Laundering and Terrorism Finance in accordance with this Recommendation 8. Recently, we've provided input to Treasury on the refinements to the NPO vulnerability statement that they present to FATF on the National Terrorism Financing Risk Assessment. We just felt that the previous statement they'd presented wasn't very strong. It was weak. Anyway, we hope, we've not seen the final, but we hope it's been improved. And now the recent draft of submission, the General Laws Amendment Bill 2026 is the version that we're looking at today. But there was another version sent out at the end of last year, which some of us on this call have already given input to Treasury. And thankfully, they've actually listened to them and they've made those changes. So that's more or less a little bit of background of the work that's been going on. Our priorities going forward, obviously, that NPO policy renewal, and I think we'll be sharing a lot more with you about that. Then, of course, the proportionate implementation of this bill affecting the NPO Act and or the regulations, we need to keep an eye on that. This is what FATF always says, always wants with the NPOs, it must be proportionate. The FATF is not a punishment to NPOs. And the reforms of Recommendation 8 that are ongoing, like I mentioned earlier, through our partnerships. So we're also assisting, well, we hope we're being positive in assisting us to remain off the grey list. And we also want to move forward to a very modern, independent and well-resourced NPO regulatory system. We're looking forward to introduction of an NPO ombud and a group of self-regulatory bodies, but that we will share more details on another day. So, overall impact, 5 years of collaboration, 3 sector submissions to government, 10 national webinars, it may be more, I've lost count, parliamentary presentations to the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. Well, I must say the National Council of Provinces last time we presented there gave us a real grilling about the sector. And thanks to Jenny, one of our panelists, she gave them just as much of a grilling. So anyway, we're on 2 national task teams. That's the NTT and the Recommendation 8. And we have one shared vision, collaborating to create a vibrant civil society. So thank you very much for listening to me. And I hope you read more details as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. As you can all hear, a stunning list of very important work over the last few years since October 2021. And I just want to remind us all that, you know, when Anne refers to the work and the people involved, everyone's a volunteer here. Everyone is giving up their time, their resources, their energy, their intellect. And so it really is good that you guys are all here showing up to hear how this all impacts the important work that you will do. So thank you very much, Anne. Let me now hand over to Suzanne Solomons.
Morning. Thank you, Ferial. Thank you, Anne. I just for this section for today's webinar, I thought it would be a good idea if we just go into some background, give some context to FATF and Recommendation 8. I think this will be a good just a place to start before Nicole and Chelsea really go into the proposed amendments to the NPO Act. So there's a bit of understanding of where these changes are coming from. So the Financial Action Task Force is a global body that sets and assesses international standards on money laundering and terrorist financing. It's made up of the FATF Secretariat that's based in Paris and regional bodies called FSRBs. There are 40 members. South Africa is one of those members. 40-member country, well, 38 of those members are countries, and then there's 2 regional bodies that make up the 40. So it's the EU Commission and the Gulf Cooperation Council. Yeah, so South Africa being one of the countries, one of the 40 members, we help set those standards and also help assess other countries. By signing up for membership, South Africa obviously agreed to endorse and fully implement the recommendations. We undergo and actively participate in systematic evaluations, and then we also face penalties for non-compliance with FATF's recommendations. The mutual evaluation process, so these happen every few years. There are 2 aspects that FATF assesses a country on. One is the assessment of the letter of the law, so the legal frameworks. That is the 40 recommendations, and that speaks to technical compliance, and that looks at the adequacy of the country's laws or legal framework. And then there's a second part of the assessment, and that is the spirit of the law, the effectiveness. And those are 11 immediate outcomes. So in 2019, we went through a mutual evaluation process. In 2021, that report was adopted by FATF. We failed 20 of the 40 recommendations and all 11 of those immediate outcomes. We were then put into ICRG, an observation period for a year from 2021 to 2022. But even after we passed the General Laws Amendment Act and the Paktatara Amendment Act, we were still grey listed in February 2023. We then applied for re-rating in 2023 and 2024. And then in October 2024, FATF accepted that we addressed 18 of those 20 deficiencies, but we still left with 2 recommendations that are still deficient. So the recommendation 8 for non-profits, and then recommendation 32 on cash couriers. An on-site visit was done last year in July, and then in October, we were removed from the grey list. And I think that is just, they felt that we'd done enough work to be removed from the grey list, but we are still not deficient on those 2 recommendations, and there's still quite a few gaps that need to be addressed. So this is the table showing those 40 recommendations. You'll see in the bright red, it's partially compliant, dark red is non-compliant. Specifically, you can see recommendation 8, this is in 2021, how they rated us. And then there is largely compliant and compliant. So non-compliant and partially compliant is a fail. Largely compliant and compliant is a pass. So yeah, so 20 of those 40 we failed. After the third enhanced follow-up report in October 2024, we were left with just the 2, recommendation 8 and recommendation 32. And then recommendation 17, they found was not applicable to us. So that's where we're currently standing with the assessment. So recommendation 8 specifically is the one recommendation that's specifically to non-profits and speaks to our work. This recommendation says that countries should identify organizations which fall within the FATF definition of an NPO. They should assess their terrorist financing risks. They should have in place focused, proportionate, risk-based measures without unduly disrupting or discouraging legitimate NPO activities. And the purpose of these measures should be to protect NPOs from terrorist financing abuse. Recommendation 8 itself is made up of 6 different criteria, and those 6 criteria have within them sub-criteria, sometimes up to 4, and they're listed from A to D. So for recommendation 8 criteria 1, at the moment it's at partly met. There's still a few shortcomings there. I'll just give you a chance to kind of read through it. So these ratings have kind of moved from 2021. Then we did another assessment in 2023 and then another assessment in 2024. So we've gone from partly met, a few of them are met, but just because there's still one that's not, recommendation 1A is still partly met. This criteria is still partly met. But B and C are met. Recommendation 8, criteria 2, we are still rated as partly met here. A is mostly met, B mostly met, C partly met, and D mostly met. So we still, because we have one partly met, it's this criteria is still only partly met. Recommendation 8, criteria 3 and 4, also both still partly met. This was not met in 2021, but we've moved up since 2023, 2024 to partly met. This recording is, there is a recording and it will be made available. We can't go into too much depth into these different criteria. We'll also share links to the different 2021 report, the 2023 report, and the 2024 report. If you want to go into more depth about how we were rated and what was done to upgrade the ratings. So we'll make those available to you. Then criteria 5, we at mostly met. So A, B, C, and D, or A, B, and C are met, right? So we would have passed on this criteria, but because of D only being mostly met, in our assessment, they found that we'd not met quite a few of all these 3 points at the bottom here in D. So for this criteria, we are still only mostly met. And then criteria 6, we are met. We were not met in 2021, and then we met this criteria or standard in 2023 and 2024. So just in summary, you can see there's quite a few gaps and reasons why Recommendation 8 is still only partially compliant. Yeah, so I'm just going to quickly go into that slide. Oh, sorry. Go into more depth, let's see. So Recommendation 8.1, partly met. Only partly met because the subset of the nonprofit sector has not been clearly identified. So in our risk assessment that was completed in 2024, they identified 120 organizations that were at risk, but those indicators that they used weren't clearly defined according to FATF. So as a country, we were rated as partly met with Recommendation 8.1. Recommendation 8.2, outreach is still limited. So there needs to be more outreach specifically to the rural organizations and to the unregistered organizations in the nonprofit sector. Recommendation 8.3, partly met. There are monitoring procedures in place, but not operational. So government needs to show evidence that these procedures are focused on the most vulnerable subset of the nonprofit sector. Monitoring and sanctions, they still remain incomplete. So the sanctions that are in place is not clear, and it's also not shown to be effective. So they rated us partly met on this part of the recommendation. And then 8.5, investigation and information, mostly met. And yeah, only because we're not able to report in time suspicious organizations or suspicious activities related to nonprofit organizations. So that's where we stand at the moment as a country with Recommendation 8. 4 of the 6 criteria within Recommendation 8 is still only partly met. Partly met is a fail. Yeah, we need to get to either mostly met or met on this recommendation. So hopefully this has given you enough background and context to the amendments that are being proposed in the NPO Act and some of the other amendments on the other acts. I'm not sure, Chelsea and Nicole, if we'll go through that. But yeah, we couldn't go into too much depth into all the criteria, but we will share links to the reports 2021, 2023, and 2024 after today's webinar with the recording. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Suzanne. And very important information that you shared, because I think we often wonder what the progress is on these matters, right? So without further ado, I'm just going to hand over to Nicole Copley and Chelsea Swanepoel. And I noticed that, so for those of you who have struggled or others who are commenting on the fact that they can't get in, please tell them to try again, because I see we're already over 100 and you can definitely join, okay? Let them know if they are still struggling. Thank you. Over to Nicole and Chelsea.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear us. And I'm just going to do that thing where I try and find the right screen to share so that we can carry on semi-seamlessly. Thank you so much, Suzanne and Anne, for the lead up to creating a platform for this. And actually for making it interesting. Thank you, Suzanne. So we've already been introduced, and let's get straight into it because everybody's got busy mornings. and my screen is sharing. Yes, here we go. There we go, working. So this is credit to Gemini for this very colorful picture about what we termed the last time we got one of these general laws amendment bills. We referred to it between ourselves and then in the open as an octopus bill, because it has its tentacles going everywhere. And we are faced with another one of those. And an octopus bill comes up when something like FATF happens and the government thinks to itself, oh my Lord, we've got to amend about 7 different acts all at once. And this is what they're trying to do, to jump through the FATF hoops again. And yeah, so the next round is with us. And we're faced with one of these again. The only part of the tentacle that we are going to be examining today is the part that's touching the NPO Act. And that's just because it's the bit that most nearly concerns everybody. And I am just trying to figure out what is wrong with my clicking. Okay. Did it work? Sorry, there we go. So in terms of what happened in the last round, the attempt was made to say that every nonprofit in the whole country, everywhere from every level, needed to register with the NPO Directorate. Those of us who had worked with the NPO Directorate rolled our eyes on whether that would be effective in any way, and also on whether the NPO Directorate would be able to contain that. Our views on this prevailed, and what was in fact adopted in that last round was a risk-based approach, as Suzanne has said. And the focus in that last set of amendments, the NPO Act, is that only organizations that provide funding overseas outside of South Africa, so a South African-based organization that works in another country, or a South African-based organization that sends funding to another country, for those organizations, registration as a non-profit organization under the Act is now compulsory. For all other organizations, it remains strictly voluntary. And just an important note here is that I often get asked, if you receive funding from overseas, is that a problem? No, not a problem. It's just if you're sending money overseas. Okay, so the ground that we've already won here, as we said in the last round, was that the compulsory registration, our freedom of association was defended in that last round. And then in terms of this new bill that's come at us, it's been through, we've had consultations and engagements with various parts of government and Treasury specifically. And the initial draft, which was talking about enforcement on all nonprofits, we managed to persuade the people drafting to look at the definition section, and we did some lawyerly arguments. And the draft that is, the bill that is now before Parliament is one in which the references to enforcement and oversight and monitoring and administration focus only on registered nonprofits and not on everybody in the entire sector, which is what it looked like it was going to be. Okay. This, however, leads us, well, not leads us, it leads the NPO Directorate to a practical problem. And that is that under the current Act, number one, the current Act as she is unamended as by this bill so far, there is a list of offences and penalties, but those are criminal things. Those are criminal actions. They are all sorts of fraud and those kinds of things which are listed in the Act, and those need criminal sanctions. However, there are no administrative sanctions in the current NPO Act. The only administrative sanction that the NPO Directorate has ever had was to remove. So if you'd voluntarily registered as a nonprofit organization and you failed to comply with the registration requirements or with the reporting requirements, or you filed false information, they would remove your status, and that was your penalty. However, now that some have to be registered, removal is not a feasible penalty. So that is why they are looking at introducing other administrative sanctions. And so the main changes we're seeing in this current bill are adding a reference to powers to monitor and enforce compliance, and then also adding detail into Section 20, saying that if an organization is required to register, in other words, it's sending money or doing activities cross-border and it's not registered, or it has not reported what is termed prescribed information, we'll come back to this word, then the director may impose administrative sanctions as prescribed. Okay. So here are the unknowns in what is currently in this bill. The one is prescribed information, and prescribed information is defined as about the office bearer's control structure, governance, management, administration, and operations, right? Pretty broad. And 18A1A refers to the fact that there must be a consultation with FICA and with the Minister of Finance about what this prescribed information is. Anybody who works in the nonprofit sector knows that the NPO reporting requirements have not changed one dot since anybody can remember. And so what this kind of prescribed information has not yet been prescribed. If it has been prescribed in some back room, it hasn't yet found its way into actual requirements in terms of the reports that NPOs, organizations that are registered as nonprofits, must file. So it is, whatever this prescribed information is an unknown. And the other unknown in this bill is the other prescribed, and that's the administrative sanctions as prescribed. Upon questioning, the people who we work with and know in the NPO Directorate have said, well, that'll be in the regulations. You'll have to wait for them. I don't know if any of you happen to have viewed the last set of regulations that came out of the NPO Directorate and DSD. They were incomprehensible and anyway, so we don't have high hopes at the moment of very good regulations. So once again, an unknown. The other thing that has been tweaked in the Act is that the arbitration tribunal, which is something that already exists inside of the NPO Act, is now able to hear appeals on administrative sanctions. So the idea is that the registrar writes to an organization and sends them a compliance notice saying you should have registered and you haven't, or saying you've registered and you haven't filed your reports. And the organization says, actually, we don't have to register because whatever, or actually, we have filed our reports, but your silly systems, I'm constraining myself in my expressions about these systems. Your reporting systems are not currently working very well at all. So we've filed all of our reports, and you just don't think you've got them because you've got no idea. So the arbitration tribunal is made up of 3 of the panel of arbitrators, and the panel of arbitrators, circling right back, is appointed by the Minister of Social Development. So what we have here in our view, and there are others in the room who can speak to this and have history about it, is what my colleague Chelsea likes to talk about as marking your own homework, in a nutshell. So we are talking about unknowns, and the unknowns are not in the law. They're not in the bill. They're outside of the bill. So yeah, Chelsea, you wanted to add something?
Oh, yeah, Nicole can see I'm on the edge of my seat here. From when we first started preparing for this presentation today, we looked at the bill again, we refreshed ourselves, and we went back through the law. The challenge here is not in the wording of the bill itself. That's our first port of call as lawyers. We look at the bill itself. It's not there. The challenges that we raised have been amended and have been fixed. So the problematic things in the written word are not there anymore. But that doesn't mean that the fight is over. We're still looking at an administrative justice case. We're still looking at a problem, how this is going to translate into the real world and how it's going to be enforced. And that's a capacity issue. It's a regulation issue. It's a design of the department issue. And this bill cannot fix that, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I know, and those of you who are in the room have presumably been part of this debate over the years, but there has been a call from the nonprofit sector for a very long time for there to be an actual independent regulator, a regulator who does not sit inside of DSD, because, well, not all nonprofits are actually relevant to DSD or need them. It's also something that DSD doesn't have the capacity, it doesn't have the proper focus for it, and it needs to be something that's actually independent of a government department, or at the very least independent of DSD. And so that is an important argument to be made. And the other important argument to be made is that in the case of appeals being heard, there needs to be some independence in those who are hearing those appeals for it to be valid in terms of administrative law functions. So those are the other thing I quickly wanted to say before we move away from the legal parts and into more general debate. And what we do want to do is, we're kind of delivering our homework to you as the lawyers and saying, we've done a lot of work in the background. We're very proud that this thing is in better shape than it was because we were persuasive, but there's stuff that the lawyers couldn't fix. And now what does the sector want to do? And what are everybody's perspectives? So that's what this gathering is for, is to get us all onto the same page in terms of where we are. Just in terms of what I've got on the screen right now, I know a lot of people have been freaking out about the penalties that are mentioned in this new bill. As lawyers, we're not concerned about it, because if you look at this extract that I've taken from the Act, the bits that I've put in darker blue text are the bits that have been added. Prior to this proposed amendment in the current bill, there is no ceiling on imprisonment or fines in the Act on the penalties that might be imposed. So the first thing to note is when we talk about penalties, we're not talking about administrative sanctions, we're talking about criminal offences. And the other is that it used to be that the sky was the limit and it no longer is. So we're not worried about that penalties. So once again, it's a technical thing that the lawyers are not worried about. The thing that concerns us is the stuff that's outside of the legal remit. And that is us. I'm going to stop sharing and throw it open. Whatever's next. Thank you, Farrell.
Yeah. Thanks, Nicole and Chelsea. And what we'd like to do now is to invite you to engage with us. I think that Nicole has brought and Chelsea has brought quite a few issues to the table here. We'd really like to hear your thoughts on some of them. I mean, she spoke about the octopus bill. It's a very interesting phenomena. The octopus bill, when it was first introduced out there, actually was developed, and it's the brainchild of Nicole Copley, right? And then she spoke about the NPO directive, the practical problem that we're facing. She referenced the offences and penalties and the fact that there is, she spoke about administrative sanctions as well. And then she spoke about the unknowns, the appeals, and the penalties. And I'm glad, Nicole, that you clarified that, because I think that was a big worry for a number of us, right, in the sector. So if I can ask those of you who wish to, ask or comment or just give us your thoughts and ideas on what we've just shared, and we can talk to you about that. Thank you. Gail says, can we get a copy of the previous submissions, or where can I find it? Gail Davids is asking.
Hi, Gail. I think, we've got them. You're talking about the previous round now.
The previous round, correct? Yes.
Yeah, we'll have them somewhere.
They are, sorry, Phil, they are on the website. There is a section on the website that says our submissions. We'll have the legislation. So there's a link of all the NPO amendment bill from 2018, was it? And then the previous GLAA, and this one is there. And I think the other one, the intelligence bill, is also there. So on the website, you'll see those legislation, and just under that, you'll see submission of comments, all the letters we've written, and what we've submitted is on the website.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm just picking up on a comment I see of Colin's about looking at compliance as a kind of a donor credibility issue, which is where nonprofits always start, right? Is how can we look shiny and wonderful so that we are at the front of the queue for the funding that's coming through. And I mean, Colin, this is the thing, is that NPO registration so far, actually, and everybody who's been in the sector for a while will know that there are still some donors who say, have you got NPO status? But over the years, we've had so many organizations say to us, nah, donors are not worried about it anymore. You only need it if you need lottery money or if you need DSD funding, because it's a legal requirement. And so, and we all know that that it lost credibility and status because of the failure to deregister over I don't know how many loads and loads of years. So it meant that the whole NPO registration group was utterly out of date. They've sorted that out now, and they have deregistered non-compliant organizations or swathes of them, but it's still not. It's still I mean, at the moment, you can make online NPO applications. As we speak, this morning we made some, but the other day it was broken again. That system is not working well. The NPO reporting online system has not yet functioned. And anybody who's been trying to file NPO reports would know we've spent the last couple of months leapfrogging from one person's full inbox to another to try and actually get people to acknowledge that NPO reports are in. And these are just like, that's just the tip of the capacity and focus and issues that are just endemic and ongoing at DSD, sadly. Which is one of the reasons we're saying, why DSD? Surely this thing. And our problem, our concern here is that there's so FATF gives us an opportunity to galvanize government into action, right? Because they're freaking out. But in this bill, there are kind of little bits of piecemeal stuff going on, and they're not being brave enough to look at big systemic change that might actually impress people.
I just wanted to clarify.
Sorry, Nicole. Can we just look at some of the questions that are in the chat? Because I think quite a few of them will lead into some of the things you're saying. There's one from Gavin Mayers. He said, this is a problem because there's an increasing amount of South African companies and organizations are stopping funding and supporting SA organizations' work unless they're registered as an NPO with the Directorate. And if you are not, they claim you are not a reputable NPO at all. Now, it's not easy at the moment in the current environment to register on the portal. And they've had, so that could you please give Gavin some guidance on what he should do here? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sometimes cheeky and say to people, we'll go back to the people who are asking you to have NPO registration and ask them what they think it's worth, because anyway, but that's a question for another time. Chelsea, you had something you wanted to add?
I just wanted to clarify, when we're speaking about compliance and assessments of compliance, NPO status is but one measure. And what we're having a discussion about and what we speak to our clients about and what we speak to donors about is, what is it that the donor is actually measuring? And for some organizations, having an NPO tick next to the organization is enough. That's what they want to stamp. And at that point, register as an NPO. If your organization is compliant for all the other measures that you're using, it will be NPO accessible. So it's just a matter of getting that filing. But what we also encourage clients to do who are experiencing the same problem where they're saying you're not a reputable NGO, it's go back to the donor and ask them what they want. What kind of marker are they looking for? Is it audited financials? Is it a strong governance system? Is it an independent board? If you can prove all of those things, then you're meeting their metrics. And we've had organizations that aren't so worried about NPO status.
Yeah,
that conversation is moot for some because it's not compulsory for some.
Yeah, that has changed because of the FATF regulations. It's for the your international donors, because we have heard of cases already where international donors have stopped funding because then they don't have an NPO number, and this bill particularly talks about the compulsory registered organizations. So if Gavin's organization is working outside of the country, or they're even giving services outside of the country, they have to register as an NPO. Absolutely. So your trust and NPCs. So that is the bit that's not very clear. Sorry, Nicole, to explain.
No, that's true. No, absolutely. If you have to register, then you have to register. Sorry, I'm seeing I can't see all of the hands, but I'm seeing Lindiwe's hand waving.
Hello, thank you, colleagues. That was very informative. I have two questions. I think the last speaker touched on one of them. And I'm looking at this Autopass bill and I've been following. And I'm wondering now the complexity of NPO, NPC interrelations, because some of the organizations, they are juggling those two, especially when they want sustainability. And I'm looking at in future, it's going to be complex. That's one part. If you can comment on that, the NPO, NPC interrelations within the people in the NPO sector. And then what is the second one, what is the process to, during this transitional breach of the bill, that we can do to cushion that NPOs are not unfairly disadvantaged because of the current requirements? What is the process that you know of?
Okay, Lindiwe, we can answer your first question easily. The second one is a harder one and a practical question. In terms of just legally, NPO status is an accreditation that an organization applies for and is granted. An NPC may be granted NPO status. A voluntary association may be granted NPO status, and so a trust may also be granted NPO status. And yes, if you are a voluntary association which also has NPO status, then you've got to comply with two systems of law, the ones that govern voluntary associations and also the NPO law. Similarly, if you are either a trust or an NPC and you also attain NPO accreditation, then you have an extra set of laws to comply with above your founding one. And that's a choice that you're making if you're a voluntary registration to try and enhance your credibility. I don't know if that's clear, Lindiwe, in terms of what you were asking.
I think it's clear, because that is where I work with them. A lot of them are struggling to function within the two systems. And I was thinking the NPO now is getting some complexity, and they need to be helped. Thank you so much.
Okay, Grant. And just the very important thing to look at when people talk about being an NPO as opposed to having NPO status is check whether they've actually got two organizations. Sometimes people draft a constitution to get an NPO number and they don't realize they've set up two orgs. And that's a world of pain ahead of you. But let's move on from that, because that's not what we're discussing today. I don't know if anybody else has any.
There's another issue which is sort of feeding in a little bit to the one we just had in the chat. Kim Conley, she says they submit their paperwork manually to the DSD because the online portal never works, which means that a new NPO registration from an NPC or a trust, how do they go about how can they submit their new application?
So the new applications, Anne, are made online, and those are working. I know that at some stage, Western Cape DSD were, even though they've stopped receiving emailed or manual applications elsewhere, Western Cape were actually uploading them for people online who couldn't manage. But no, there's no difference in terms of, as a VA or a trust or an NPC, how you apply online. You fill in the same sorts of information. Well, you fill in the relevant information for the type of legal entity, and that application is definitely online. The reporting stuff is still effectively manual, and that's just because their reporting system's not working.
So that was Kim's question then, that they're submitting their paperwork. They're registered, but how do they go about that? Then Colin comes up with, he recognises the burden and the constraints of many NPOs to comply with generally accepted governance obligations, but on the other hand, is the lack of compliance impacting on the ability to access funding and give donor confidence that their money will be properly managed, which goes back to the three questions actually come together. If you're not compliant, where do you go from there? What advice?
Yeah, so I mean the issue is going to be, and I mean, these are administrative questions. If you're not compliant and you need to be compliant and you haven't got the right kind of things in place, you haven't got enough people on your board, or you haven't done your financials for the year, or whatever it is, then you need to get those in order. If you're deemed to be not seen as not compliant because your reports, although you filed them, and although you do comply, have been misread, misunderstood, lost, or whatever that is, then that's a technical admin issue, and that is something that we need a new DSD to fix, basically, which is not happening at the moment.
That speaks to Prashima's comment here. How do we make sure that the NPO Directorate complies with this law?
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line here. We've got fabulous legislation in this country. We've got laws that speak to each other. Our Companies Act is one of the most innovative pieces of legislation in the last 20 years. But at the same, how does that translate to the on-the-ground lived experience of everyday South Africans and everyday South African NPOs? And I'm afraid we don't have the answers to this. We can tell you how to comply with the legislation. We can tell you what boxes to tick. We can tell you what's worked for us and the nonprofits that we serve. But at the end of the day, how do we get the NPO Directorate to follow the legislation and the regulations and the pieces of law that they're making? In the words of Nicole, chain yourself to the gates. We're trying to ask this question too.
Yeah. Gail has asked, and Gail, yes, just that is correct. If you are currently doing work cross-border, if you're in South Africa and you're working in another country, or you're in South Africa and you're sending funds out of South Africa, yes, registration as an NPO is compulsory. That was what came in the 2022 Act. And thank you for putting in the addresses, yes. And those are the addresses that you're emailing things to at the moment. Yeah, Eugene, I agree with you about progressive and incremental compliance. But the problem here is the FATF deadlines. So we can't proceed in an orderly manner, it seems, towards something that we all are. These things take time to build, and they take time to get right. But yet these bills are being constantly placed in front of us just because Mayday, Mayday, we need to tick some more FATF boxes. Mm. And as Suzanne has mentioned in her presentation, the places where South Africa is failing is not so much in the legislative stuff, but in the actual administration and implementation in the law. Yes.
Yeah.
Gerald, your system's offline. Was that for reporting or for new application? Maybe put that in the. Yeah.
And Nombulelo, we agree with you.
Nobody's reading those reports.
The reports haven't changed as long as I've been alive. And it goes back to that question of what are they actually measuring and what are they actually looking for? We are looking for non-compliant nonprofits. Well, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Is it a nonprofit that doesn't have certain things in their founding documents, or is it a nonprofit who's actually using it for ill intent?
Yeah, yeah. And I think in terms of the reporting requirements too, and the compliance requirements, one of the things that people who are in this room are currently working on is to try and get the Act and the regulations to change so that there are different kind of grades or standards of compliance that are required of different types of organizations. So, for instance, if you're registered as a nonprofit company, you will know that if the money that you earn goes over a certain amount, that you have to have higher reporting requirements. And that's the kind of graduated thing that needs to apply in the nonprofit sector, so that very small organizations have more minimal requirements, and those who are handling large funds, yes, they should have to jump through higher hoops. Yeah.
So Nicole, I think it's worth our while saying that a lot of these amendments wouldn't be happening unless it was the FATF and the grey listing, which is very important. And with I'm sure earlier you picked up that there are only 2 recommendations outstanding to be compliant or largely compliant. the one being recommendation 8, which is non-profits, and the other one being recommendation 32, which is cash couriers. Now, on the NPO, the technical deficiency there is beyond us in the sector. We can't help. The oversight of the vulnerabilities require further targeted legislative and regulatory adjustments. If we don't get on top of this, we will not move from partially compliant to compliant. And we were told, I think it was hinted by Momo, that we could be back on the grey list. Now, I don't agree with that, and we would be the fall guy if that happened. But how do we in the sector ensure this doesn't happen? Anybody with any ideas?
Just trying to see if there are any other questions.
And you have a very good question. How does the sector stop that from happening? The sector that's in this room is definitely concerned with being compliant and definitely concerned with being correct and doing things in the right way that makes the nonprofit sector as a whole better and makes the nonprofit sector more attractive for funding, and therefore individual organizations more attractive for funding, so that the work can get done. How do we make government departments follow their laws? Advocacy, meetings, engagements, building trust. And I think over the last 3 years since this first Octopus bill that landed on our desks in an absolute hurry with an almost impossible deadline, the work that the nonprofit sector did to get that bill in good shape and to remove us from the grey list over time, well, that's done a lot of trust building. But there is still more to go, and there is still more work to be done. There need to be conversations between the sector itself and these departments of the government, and that doesn't mean that only government needs to listen. It means that the sector needs to speak. And so what needs to be done? Well, those channels need to be opened, and they need to not be concerned with individual organizations' problems of we can't register, we can't get funding, we can't get our things in order because nobody answers their phone. That is a challenge, and that is a lived experience, and that is real. But there is a bigger picture.
And we missed a very good question here from Amanda. The challenge that NPOs face is that members of their governing bodies, be it board or management committee, the positions are voluntary. As the demands for compliance escalate, you find that NPOs face resignation of board members as they do not have the time. Is there a possibility of compensating persons who join, maybe with enhanced sustainability? Could that lead to sustainability, or would the compliance still be off-putting?
This is a touchy question in the nonprofit sector, where some people are all for we must pay people for their time on boards, and some people are hell no, never. And people have very different views on this. So it's not illegal to compensate people who are on your board. Compensate them fairly, yes. And it would be, our advice would be that any compensation that happens to board members needs to be transparently disclosed. The actual amounts should be in the financial statements. In the case of a with members organization, we also say that any remuneration for people who are on the board should actually be approved by the wider membership body, which is one of the principles inside the Companies Act for with members NPCs. And so that could be our perspective on that. And I think if you're looking at building a sustainable board to make your organization sustainable, that is probably a question you're going to have to consider.
And there's another very brave comment here from Prashima. Can the NPO sector come together collective as a group of NPOs and take national to court due to their non-compliance to this law? Well, let's look at what's been happening in Gauteng, and for
Yeah.
non-compliance and with the grants. They did take them to court and the court was on their side. Have they got their money? No. So anyway, I think it's a good idea, but maybe our energy can be used in a different way.
And on that, a constitutional court case is a 10-year commitment. And that's what would be needed in order to make real and lasting change. But in order to even get there, before you even are before the courts, there needs to be an assessment of ripeness. Is it ripe and is it actually appropriate? You can't preempt something that hasn't happened yet. So as Nicole was saying in her presentation, we're looking at these as prescribed, these regulations as prescribed. We, as the nosy lawyers in the room, would want to know what those new requirements are going to be before we can know whether we are happy with them or not, or whether they're doing justice or not. But we can't get there yet because they haven't been created. And even once they are created, until they cause a real practical problem, there's nothing to take to court. So, and even if we do take it to court, there's a 10-year commitment before we get there and we get actual change. And as Anne said, maybe our energy can be used elsewhere in a better way. And it's opening those channels, opening that communication and creating that dialogue.
Exactly. And one of those energy areas can be when we do a presentation to the standing committee next week. We can't argue about the legal aspects, but what we can argue is the fact that the lack of explanation and understanding is not coming through. I think Amanda raises another interesting point here, that the NPO mentorship model that the DSD has developed, they are seeking a service provider who will mentor NPOs on compliance. Is that aligned with the new bill? Actually, this is part of the Recommendation 8 task team work.
Yes.
About that whole, but that mentorship includes how to fill out reports and all that sort of thing. It's not so much focused on FATF. Am I correct? Does anybody know the details of that mentorship model?
No.
Hi, Anne, can I comment on that? So
Yeah, there's still a couple of comments I see in the chat here.
yeah, there's quite a few people on the call today who were part of that mentorship training model that was offered by DSD. There were 2 rounds of it in the past 3 years. And where this model is at the moment, they put out a call RFP, must have been last year, about maybe 8 months ago, for someone to oversee that, the rollout of that mentorship model. And the first iteration was for this to happen in 5 of the 9 provinces. So I know that went out. The deadline was sometime January or February, and we have not heard anything about, who has been considered. So that too has just fallen by the wayside. And I know a lot of people put in a lot of effort. As I say, I see a couple of people online here who were actually part of that training and waiting patiently to hear, how we feed into this, because it's obviously, very much needed intervention. I think if it can be rolled out in all the 9 provinces. So that's as much as I know about it, Anne. Thanks.
Hi, sorry,
Thank you for
Gerald.
that. Gerald, go ahead, Gerald.
Gerald Erasmus on this side. As far as I know, the model for the mentorship is supposed to be a tender-based situation that's now, again, having a little bit of a cease. It's again one of those situations where the tenders have gone out, but nothing's been selected yet. So the specifically targeted provinces being KZN, Eastern Cape and Western Cape, Mpumalanga and the West provinces, they've had their active mandates given, but there's not that many rollouts or accepted tenders at this stage. The tenders were supposed to be in late 2025, early 2026, but again, the rollout is significantly slower, and they're trying to do some funding safeguards, but it seems that there's a lot of ifs, buts, and maybes included in that, which is problematic.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So that's a little bit more insight on the mentorship model. So it looks, Amanda, that that's going to be quite some time before we hear what's really going on there. Fiona, hello Fiona, old friend. Fiona used to be part of our panel. Fiona, don't you want to share? Let's hear your voice about what you're saying, because I think a lot of organizations are going through the same pain. Would you like to share verbally?
Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to see all of you again. Definitely a good opportunity to talk here. I think common issues, especially because many of us were busy with these new funding applications over the past couple of months, is that they were trying to push us to do the new applications together with this online registrations that they wanted everyone to do. And common things that were coming out from many NPOs, because I've been to like our provincial office so many times, and every time I sat there, I watched many other NPOs sitting in the line trying to sort their issues out with DST. And they would have one person who only seems to know what's going on, of course, and one person working through individual documents per organization. And a common thing that I was seeing was that when they were getting into the new online system, they were finding NPOs didn't exist, first of all. Apparently, because years back, there were some consultants who were helping people to get NPO numbers. So their actual certificates are not even proper or authentic. And all these years, they've been practicing as NPOs. Only to find out that they're nowhere in the system registered because there's some extra number attached to the NPO number. So that was quite scary to see. And I saw two organizations sitting there discovering that. And they've been existing for many years. But I think the biggest issue here for us in terms of the implementation is the fact that majority of us are not even doing anything wrong. We are complying and doing the right thing with our submissions. It's the system that is doing all the wrong thing. And when they migrated to the new system, it's kicked a lot of us out. It's changed our year end and done a whole lot of mess ups. It's not carried over our board members, current board members. So now we are faced with the challenge of trying to fix it ourselves. And yet again, there's only one person to go to fix it. And the one person, if he's not there in the office, everybody's stuck because nobody else in DST knows what they're doing. So I think that's the biggest challenge with all of us in terms of the non-compliance. A lot of us are busy with audits right now, want to go into our AGMs, and we're so nervous because we don't have the NPO compliance letters. And we can't get, even your last year's takes forever to come through because their system has all the wrong information captured. And we can't understand how they can't fix their system, but they expect us to keep fixing everything and changing everything. And like I was told, go back and have a special general meeting and amend my constitution again to fix something.
Yeah, as if it's just something you do on a Tuesday. Yeah,
such a mess. And until somehow or the other we figure this out, many of us are going to sit for another year or two with lots of non-compliance issues, and it impacts us very negatively.
Yeah, so Fiona, and I see the other people in the chat saying, what on earth do I do? I've got donors who require proof of non-profit.
They want the compliance. And that's another issue because people are assuming if you got your acknowledgement, it is safe and you can use it. But most funders don't want your acknowledgement. They want the actual compliance. And many NPOs are stuck with that process.
Yeah, so I only have one lawyerish kind of a piece of advice to give on that. And that is something that I know works in the Master of the High Court's context, and that might work with your donors here, and that is to put it down on affidavit. So if you've got a history and you've got the record of, we lodged these documents, we sent them in, the system bounced, it wouldn't accept it because of this, it wouldn't accept it because of that, and you can take snips of things and put them in an affidavit and then sign that. I mean, that's my only practical suggestion of what you can give to people to say, this is why we can't give you that other piece of paper.
Sure.
So, yeah, and I mean, just in terms of that new system, just yesterday, somebody in our office was trying to make an application for a client, and it was a client that's, they're a church. There is no category for churches. Why?
There's education, humanitarian, humanitarian and cultural, which are apparently two of the same, sport and recreational, business, or international. Please tell me what public benefits or community activity international is.
Yeah, so big problems, system problems, capacity problems, delivery problems.
Arbitrary questions will receive arbitrary answers, unfortunately, which goes back to what are they looking for?
Exactly. So they're now, so if you have to register and you're a religious organization, you're having to just pick one. So you're going to be put on some list and targeted for something or other that you aren't, because you just had to pick one.
You had to pick one, and none of them were appropriate. None of them were logical or based in law or any other activity. My joke yesterday was they called a meeting of people and said, name every kind of nonprofit you can, and they came up with 3 answers and said that must be all of them.
Yeah,
So
I just
again,
want to.
sorry, who was that?
Sorry, Gerald again. I also
That's
just want to
okay.
pop in there because the same, I detailed it a little bit earlier. The same situation is the fact that we've been struggling with a lot of SARS legislation on NPO sides of things. For instance, you don't have to pay SDL. There's certain VAT things that you can claim for when you're welfare and humanitarian services, etc. And I can tell you the amount of trouble that I had to go through with the visits to the actual SARS offices for them to point me to the next SARS office, to point me to email addresses that took me to customs, just for them to tell me that there is no such thing as a Welfare and Humanitarian Service Act certification anymore, and that we basically have to push our luck, try the submission, and then go from there.
Okay, so Gerald, this is maybe an offline discussion, because I think I know where the hole is there, where the gap is. But it's just
we did figure it out. The main thing that I wanted to point out in this instance is that the systems that are not supposed to be working together, for instance, for this mentorship model, CIPC, Home Affairs, and SARS are supposed to be working together to help remove certain bottlenecks. But if you go onto a SARS profile and you try and find the reasons for your bottleneck, you're going to sit there for days on days. And then if you go to the office to ask for help, the people look at you as if yes, and
going to an office is not useful. We agree. And in fact, so our major issue here is that the onlining and electronification and e-filing upness of the tax exemption unit, which has created amazing efficiencies with turnarounds in tax exemption applications, has also created a situation where we no longer, as a public, have access to people who actually understand the tax exemption laws when it comes to.
There we go. Because the only reason I managed to talk to the tax exemption unit was the fact that I had to stop by basically forcing SARS to pay attention to our profile, by stopping any payments for unnecessary items like the SDL. So we would remove the SDL, then get audited, and then it takes up to 6 months for them to finalize that audit. But we still have to go back previous years to fix that too, because of course the previous accountants or auditors did not pick up on the fact that an NPO in this specific sector does not need to, or an NPO that's registered for that matter, does not need to pay SDL at all. So we've been trying to get into the perfect compliance mode, but between the different sectors, we are an NPO, not an NPC, so CIPC gets ruled out. We have nothing to do with Home Affairs. So it's between SARS and the DSD. And the DSD and SARS both held up our audit last year because, of course, the amounts were material. We couldn't just let the audit pass with that. Even though the previous auditors may have done so, we had to make sure that we now fix it going forward. And with that being said, that just opened up 10 different cans of worms, no responses from anyone. I ended up with customs at SARS with no help either. So I just redid, or well, I amended our registration documents on SARS, found some issues, submitted, and we're finally VAT compliant, where they are obviously paying us back, which is great. But now we're
Yeah.
having trouble with SARS, and the reason that we don't have a proper registration number with Nedbank, they're not allowing us to send um, our proof of banking as a proper proof of banking. So again, the people in charge, supposing to help us, are the ones that are driving us against the wall.
Yeah.
And tomorrow and the day
Thank you.
after.
Thank you. Yeah, can we just go back a little bit to the bill?
Sorry. Yes, of course.
No,
Of course.
no, Gerald, your thought, but we need to sort of come out of this session, this consultation, with your thoughts about the bill. We need to do that. Now, one of the things that you've brought up is about the portal being a problem. That's not just a domestic issue. If the NPO Directorate has an inefficient or chaotic portal with data on it, how can they then do background checks on the organizations that are doing cross-border work? How do they do that efficiently, effectively? And this is now the argument in the bill. If that department is going to do the investigation and be the decision maker, how are they then going to instigate charges and make it a criminal act of the work that they've been doing, which Nicole mentioned earlier? So this whole thing of the department doing the investigations from a very chaotic database is a big problem. And that alone could keep us on the grey list. That alone. It is quite a serious thing. And how to get their attention, a couple of people have said, how do we get the DSD and the NPO Directorate to actually do their work? What a good question. How do we get them to shape up?
Sorry, just as another added part, with any new programs, any new websites, anything that you build newly, you have to go through a beta phase, and you have to, of course, go through an implementation stage. What the DSD is currently failing to do is provide the proper resources for everybody to be able to submit their registrations or re-registrations on their website, whereas they're supposed to be contacting a certain amount of NPOs, give them a turnaround time, and then move on to the next batch, so that there's no influx of data, no server maintenance issues, because the server can handle the amount of data that's being pushed through. And then with that batch of data, they're supposed to be able to see what's going to happen with the next batch of people. And they're not doing that. The government is all about full implementation. Every year when we do the SARS tax submissions, the first 3 weeks, you can do nothing on SARS. If you're lucky, you can do it at around 2-3 o'clock in the morning. But other than that you just suffer.
You know, Gerald, sorry, Nicole, I just want to make a comment on that, Gerald. We were at a symposium in March last year, 2025. Nicole and Anne, I know you were there. I don't know who else on the call that was at that symposium, but that was, we asked them to do that because we'd already known that they were going to have this new online portal. We asked them, please just go through this testing phase first. And you know, by end of last year, this new system just hit us, and no one had had anything of a testing phase.
It's the problem when you're not meeting deadlines that are feasible.
Suzanne, I mean, I absolutely agree. They mucked it up. I'm looking at some of the comments which are around the bigger picture, and there, Denise's comment, we're one of the largest contributors to the welfare sector. I think you'll find that people in this room who think we're one of the largest contributors to the economy, full stop, too. Petitions to the president, none of these departments know. In Natalie's question, in view of law reform and in view of DSD systems and departmental issues, what needs to shift for the legal framework? So, I mean, and Suzanne, Farrell, I don't know if we can, I mean, there is meant to be a process underway, which is about an entire review of how the nonprofit sector is regulated. There is a process of drafting a policy around that, which is meant to lead to serious and kind of, and those of us who have been involved in it, fundamental shifts in the way that reporting and administration and regulation is structured. That process appears to have stalled at the moment, and either that or DSD is just distracted by their internal shenanigans and trying to jump through the FATF hoops and not looking at the big picture. But certainly there needs to be, we basically can't rely on government. We certainly can't rely on DSD to drive a series of reforms that is going to take away from them an area which they would think of as an area of competence. We think is an area of incompetence, and give it and put it somewhere else. We can't rely on government to do that big picture thinking and driving things on behalf of the sector. The sector needs to be doing it themselves, right? And Carol.
Yeah. Can I add to, I mean, I know we've kind of been talking around the capacity issues at DSD, and one of the unintended consequences of FATF or being grey listed is a positive one, and it's showing the gaps in the systems, the lack of integration, and if we have to be grey listed again just because R8 isn't met, maybe maybe the whole of government will wake up, and hopefully then we'll have some sort of some changes that we need as a sector. But yeah, I think if that's one way, depend on FATF to kind of just constantly fail us as the recommendation 8, maybe we'll get what we want.
Sorry, Suzanne, I think that's a problem, because if that does happen, then it means it'll take us another, don't know how many years, to bring this back into scope. And I mean, it's taken us how long now? And I don't want to be a doomsayer here, but it's just too long. I'm sorry, there's just, communities cannot wait that long. There's a decline in the country as a result of these delays. And so we're doing our best to bring it into scope, and that's why we're meeting today, is to, guys, bring your voices in. What is it that you think we should be saying to them through the bill? And about Anne, I'll hand it over to Anne.
Yeah, Jean has got a hand up, Farrell.
Jean has said something in response to Suzanne. Yes, make us suffer, go back on the grey list. If you hear how awful it is in Kenya, Brian was telling me, they work so hard from the NPO side, civil society side, to stay off the grey list. And somehow they keep going back onto the grey list. It's very painful. And Jean has already pointed out that this would come at a huge cost, extraordinary cost to the whole of the South African economy. And that is why we've got to get this right.
Yeah.
Sibonkulu Gumedi has said something, I can't quite read it, it's quite like, could you actually share that, but verbalize that?
Can I read
it? Is there no better way?
Is there a better way? Because so far what I can think is that these measures will have a negative effect on smaller organizations or communities even. Seems like a blanket approach. Shouldn't there be a tiered system? Is her question. But most importantly, the DSD needs to improve its internal capacity and systems before it gets more power to punish, in inverted commas. I'm sorry, was that Sibongile who wanted to speak? I better just be quiet. Sibongile, do you want to go ahead?
Good morning, everyone. Yes, that was something that I think I understood based on the presentation and doing some background research from my end. Also, but most importantly, my concerns comes from being in an organization that's usually want to hold the government accountable. So if they're given more power, what does it mean for us as a nonprofit organization that fights for the human rights and ensuring that the government comply and that they service their communities? So what does it mean? Are we not going to be restricted or having our voices silenced as a social justice movement? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I think Jean's been waving her hand politely for some time.
Oh, Jean, sorry, I didn't see your hand, Jean. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Nicole. Yes, and you're quite right, and that's why I put up my hand even after posting the note. Grey listing comes at an extraordinary cost for any economy, more so for smaller economies, and in a global environment, South Africa would be a mid-tier economy. So it comes at an extraordinary cost. And smaller organizations, NPO organizations, and the community that the not-for-profit sector serves are disproportionately affected by the consequences of grey listing. So I think it's really important to work to avoid that. But on the other hand, it's also important not to allow a threat that may not actually be existing, a threat of grey listing, to push through disproportionate legislation. And that's the risk that we have now. Take into account that they've done, I think, 6 new round evaluations, and many of those countries are not under increased supervision, which is your road to grey listing, despite having a partially compliant rating on recommendation 8. So it doesn't hinge on recommendation 8. Secondly, the question the assessors are going to come and ask is, show us how effectively, how well are you implementing existing law? So now use the bill to push back, to not widen the scope of the work of the NPO Directorate, but to narrow it down. Remind them that the question is not what do they have in law. The question is how are they implementing that law. And at the moment, I think the track record of the NPO Directorate is not particularly good. That's all.
Thank you, Jean. Yes, your points are very, very well taken. And this comes back to, if we do make a presentation to the Standing Finance Committee next week on this bill, how do we now frame all these other misunderstood that's going out into the world there of the NPO world, and the frustrations that they're taking, the whole subset, who are in the subset. I don't think anyone on this call would, oh yes, I think there's one organization that does cross-border work, but those organizations are the ones that are going to be under the microscope. But I see Gail Davids. Gail, you suggest that we write a legal complaint to the NPO Directorate and the Minister, the DSD, Minister Pule, on the problems stated in this meeting, and we will sign it. So we've got 2 things. Do we write a letter now to the DSD with our concerns about a number of issues? And how do we go about presenting our bill next week in Parliament? 2 things we've got to bring together somehow. Any thoughts? And yes, Colin, you're right. There are some really great people in the DSD. We know them, and but they sometimes just the systems too complex to sort out.
There's a hand from Fiona. And
Hi again. Two comments here. From experience, and we all know, as much as we have all our policy legislation coming from national, when we try to take issues up nationally, when policy and legislation is not working at grassroots level, we get diverted back to province because they always push the buck back to provinces to implement and to make sure those policies are being followed. So it leaves us back to handling it in your own province. And that's not always the best route to go because you don't get answers, whether you write up to the HOD or the minister or whomever. It's very hard to get responses from them, whether you're in the public domain and putting their face out there. So that's what experience has taught us, even in KZN when we took up Nawongo order. That too, I mean, we had a small win there for the CYCCs, but going further from that, we haven't moved because they've always got answers at provincial level with all their budget cuts. My second point is that what I'm understanding is that from this discussion, you're going to take recommendations back to your further meeting next week around all this criteria and what's come out from today's meeting. And when I look at all that criteria that we obviously have not met, majority of it is sitting around, I don't know who is it? Is it DSD or government per se that should be making sure that they conduct risk assessment of NPOs, promote accountability, promote outreach, develop best practices, oversight and monitoring. That's coming out quite clear in all that criteria, taking steps to improve the measures and monitoring compliance is very clear over there. And then we're talking all the real implementation problems around monitoring compliance. So my question would be, I don't know, have they nationally got a task team that is addressing these issues to help move it from not met, partially met to being met? And if they do, who's holding them accountable? And if they don't, then that's some part of our recommendation should be that if we reach this point, now we need to get to the nitty-gritty of criteria 1, 2, 3, 4 that we're not meeting and have a more stronger body or committee in place, including some of our people here, to hold them accountable, to move forward on addressing these issues. And that task team could actually bring out a lot more things in terms of the implementation problems we have. Thanks.
Thank you for that. See, there's quite a few hands clapping. Natalie as well, the same sort of thing in view of law reform and in view of DSD system and departmental issues. What needs to shift to the legal framework? Or is the proposed legal framework appropriate in view of implications for NPOs? Nicole, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I'd already actually mentioned that and said that, said that I agree that the focus is in the wrong place. Absolutely.
Yeah. A complete, I don't know, unpicking or a review of the role of the NPO Directorate might be worth looking at. But also Natalie asked about is there research or is there a review of why NPOs are problematic? Anybody found anything on that?
Natalie's got her hand up, Anne.
Natalie, go ahead.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not seeing hands. I'm sorry.
That's all right. No problem. I'll try to be brief. So usually, in terms of the law, somebody writes law when something is wrong. And I'm new to the NPO space and I'm new to the DSD. However, I'm not new to national. I'm not new to the Department of Environmental Affairs and how they do things. And it's a similar pattern. And often when there's a problem, someone writes the law, but the people writing the law don't consider the capacity or the capability required to implement the law. They're also often not clear on what the issue is that the law is supposed to try and fix. Now, I look at the NPO space, I look at the NPO reports, I look at the system, and I'm realizing, okay, fine. So someone developed a system to help manage these 200,000 plus odd NPOs. And someone said, okay, you're compliant if you've got a report and you're compliant if you've got a financial statement. But what is the issue? Is the issue that people are spending people's money not in the right way, or what is it? So I almost want to again, I am ignorant of the space, but what if I'm in agreement that there should maybe be a bit of a task team set up with government to try and understand what is the issue here that we actually want the law to fix, and then build a system, not a system, I mean, create compliance criteria that is relative to the issue that needs to be fixed. Because in the South African government, we often over-administer, over-regulate, and come up with a whole bunch of bureaucracy that potentially isn't required. And I understand that because corruption and things are very real in this country. But if I look at the environmental sector, there's a shift towards self-regulation, where the basics is I'm an NPO, I assess myself, I claim to be compliant. And then every now and then someone does a spot check on me, an audit, and they say, well, actually you lied, here's your penalty, or you didn't lie, wonderful, you've got a green light. But now here's the challenge. The challenge is the system is broken. And when I say system, I mean the online platform that people rely on to give them that basic raw data. And until that system is fixed, we're kind of milling around trying to fix the issue around information that's not available to us, if that makes sense. So maybe the big call is let's call for a complete revamp of that NPO Act. However, before we get there, what is it that we want this online system to do for us as the sector? So in the national space of the Department of Environmental Affairs, there is an open collaboration with public or civil society. Now, I'm not sure if it's the same in the DSD. It feels like they are quite in a tower somewhere. I don't know where they are. Sorry, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but maybe the call should be for more active collaboration in terms of that system and its purpose and how it can help us and how it can help them, and then work on law reform in the background. But thank you for the airtime, and I appreciate this session very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Natalie. Then, Natalie, we really would like to encourage you to join the panel. I don't know what your time's like, but please think about it, because you've raised some really good discussion points that we need to bring forth. We need to get stronger, and we need a lot more input from the sector, because that is one of the questions they will ask us when you go to Parliament. Who are you? Who do you represent? And how loud is your voice, or whatever? And unless we can turn around and say, well, we've had this, we had nearly 200 people attending a webinar, and these are their concerns, then that gives us some meat on the bone. So please consider, all of you, about giving us some more power to our muscle here. There was something that just disappeared now that somebody was asking. Sorry, I've lost it. And we seem to be coming to the end of our discussion. We've got just a couple of minutes left. And Nicole, did you pick something up?
Jean's waving.
Can I quickly say something? Sorry, I'm sound rude, but I want to be quick because time is of the essence. Natalie, you make an excellent point. The question is, what is the law supposed to solve?
Agreed.
Yeah,
100% agreed.
And very specific to this particular bill is that recommendation 8 is a terrorist financing recommendation. The legislation that you adopt for it needs to be aimed at dealing with terrorist financing, which raises, and I think that's a very, very strong argument in terms of any propositions and in terms of the bill that they're putting on the table. And then secondly, in terms of FATF, they specifically allow for self-regulation. And remember, countries can come and tell their own story. So I almost want to throw it out there and say, one, think about a shadow report, but one that there's 102 people on this call, which I would venture would mean 102 organizations. That can make a compelling, substantive contribution. And then secondly, if you can be quick enough and get it up so that by October you can tell, and even by February next year, when the assessors are on site and in country, this is what you can actually tell a story about. This is how the civil society went about self-regulating in the absence of an effective public regulator, which could actually strengthen South Africa's position to stay off the grey list.
John, that is amazing. I want to just quickly, and this is my colleague Chelsea's view as well, that she raised the other day in some other context. The nonprofit sector in South Africa is self-regulating. We are. Everybody is. Everybody knows what their donors need, what their boards need, what general governance requirements are, what general compliance is. We're doing that anyway. And in fact, we're doing it, and we're battling to find some sort of a legislative hook to hang that hat on, to say, here we are, we've done it, because nobody's looking at us in the right kind of way, or using the right kind of matrix or the right kind of lens. But absolutely, nonprofits are busting a gut to do governance and compliance correctly, and we can prove that. Everybody can. Yeah.
So write that shadow report. Write it and get it in.
Okay. More will be discussed, John.
There's another hand, Esther. Esther, did you want to say something?
Oh, hi, Esther. Hi, Esther.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, and everyone, Suzanne, and for all the lovely introductions and information. Sorry that I only come in like the last minute. I just wanted to raise two things. The first thing is that I believe that you are going to present to Parliament. So that's a very important step. And I think it's very important that you have a good, substantiated argument that you are going to raise. But what I wanted to say that we all have been part of that terrorist financing risk assessment for the NPO sector. So that very thick report had findings. And I think it's important that that report is there. So we know what is the exposure of the NPO sector to terrorist financing, whether it is right or wrong. It is a report and proper research that was done. So I think the number one point that I want to make is that the legislative amendments and what they propose should be proportional to the issues raised in that report and the areas that they have raised as, risk areas and not other areas. And the second thing I wanted to say is that, just thinking about legislation and controls and considering the fact that, also the point that was made earlier that government doesn't have the capacity to implement a lot of that. But also, the more internal controls you implement, the less service delivery you are going to have. And that is a proven fact internationally. So I think that's also one of the points that, over regulating an industry will basically squash service delivery. So we have to be very careful to what we are actually pushing onto the NPOs, because they are going to suffer at the end. So, and maybe that can be demonstrated. And the third thing is what I would definitely discourage is to take FATF and their recommendations as a mandatory legislative requirement, although I do understand that it costs a lot of money and they have a lot of say internationally, but they are not regulators. So it's important that we take whatever they recommend and we implement it our way. So that is just my comments at the last hour of the meeting. But yes, I mean, and if you want to send me any documents, I'm very happy to look at it before next week.
Esther, thank you so much for that. And
I'm happy to also be part of the discussion if you need me there.
Right. You're on board. Thank you, Esther. Thank you. Can I now hand back to Ferrell for the final part of the program, unless there's a burning issue going on here?
You can. I mean, I'm happy to take over.
I can. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's been tremendous. I'm sad that we've come to the end of it because I did think that there were probably many more who may have wanted to make their last minute comments, like you, Esther. So thank you for that. I mean, I think it's been tremendous. Your comments, your ideas. There was a bit of a concern that we were going in one direction, but I'm happy to hear it all came back so that we have quite a bit of information to feed into the amendments that we're hoping to present next week on the 11th of August. There is really nothing more for me to say. Thank you to everyone. You've been very engaging, and yes, we've got the recording, and so all the comments are there. We'll feed that into a report. We'll send you the link to the webinar, and you'll get access to the presentations. And we'd like to encourage you, of course, to share it widely within your networks, because the next time we do a webinar, we'd really like to see 250 to 300 people, quite a significant number registered. At least 110 were with us for the most part. And so I really, really appreciate that you've actually allocated 2 hours of your day to this very important discussion that impacts all of us at the end of the day. And your comment about there's some good people in DSD, I also want to acknowledge that. We, as many of us, are working with the most amazing individuals, but there's always more work to be done, right? And so, again, thank you. Thank you so much. We look forward to the next one. We'll give you some feedback and updates at the next round. And if there's any more ideas, please send it to us, email us. It would really be good to hear from you. There's a few of you we may reach out to individually. Anne, did you say something?
That's me. I was just going to say those who've been making contributions to the thinking about what should go before Parliament next week, please put those in writing and send them through. Anne did mention that we're none of us being paid for any of this time spent doing this. So the more hands we have at the wheel and the more ideas we have, the better. Also note that if you have a particular thing that you want to make a submission on that you feel is maybe representative of your particular sector or your group and that it shouldn't be part of the general one, make your own submission. We can, I think the details of the email addresses and the things that submissions need to be lodged with and the times of the presentations, and just in terms of presentations made to parliamentary committees, keep them short, keep them interesting, and make sure that they explain things properly.
Pictures, no words. They don't like reading at all.
Anyway, okay, but please do send through anybody who said useful things, please write them down and send them through to us. We'd really appreciate being able to include those suggestions.
Yeah. And in terms of the time, Nicole, we would prefer to have it in the next day or two.
Yeah, it's lastminute.com at our desk, definitely. Yeah.
We'd like to submit by the end of this week, hopefully.
Yes.
Okay.
Good breathing. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the presenters as well. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank
you for having us. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Lovely to meet
Thank
you all.
you.
Ciao.
Nicole, Chelsea, and Anne, Suzanne, can you stay on, please? And we can just do a quick